Why do you have my mother's picture? Emily Harrington's voice was quiet, but the question stopped the waitress in her tracks. The glass of iced tea in Claire Bennett's hand trembled for half a second before she carefully placed it on the table. Around them, the Boston diner continued with its ordinary evening rhythm. Silverware tapped against plates. Coffee poured into white mugs. Rain whispered against the windows. But Emily heard none of it. She was staring at the small photograph sticking out from the waitress's worn leather wallet. The woman in the picture had been smiling beside a garden gate, her dark hair lifted slightly by the summer breeze. Emily knew that face better than any face in the world. It belonged to her mother, Laura Harrington. You know her? Claire asked softly. Emily almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. She is my mother. Claire's face lost its color. That is impossible. Why? Because your mother gave me that picture 6 years ago. Emily slowly pulled the photograph from the wallet. Her fingers tightened around the edges. My mother died 6 years ago. Claire looked toward the kitchen, then toward the front windows. She seemed to be checking whether someone was listening. That is what everyone was told. At the next booth, Ethan Carter quietly lowered his coffee cup. He was a 38-year-old single father who had stopped at the diner with his daughter, Lily, after her school music program. He had not intended to listen to anyone else's conversation. But a father learns to notice when a room suddenly changes. Lily was drawing stars on a paper napkin beside him. Dad, she whispered. Ethan looked at her. What is it? Why is that lady crying? Ethan glanced toward Emily. She was not crying yet. She was trying very hard not to. I do not know, sweetheart. He returned his attention to his daughter, but his eyes remained alert. At the counter, Claire leaned closer to Emily. You need to put that picture away. Why? Because if someone sees you with it, they will know you found me. Emily froze. Who? Claire swallowed. I cannot tell you here. Emily looked around the diner. She saw families, college students, an elderly couple sharing pie, and Ethan sitting quietly with Lily. Nothing seemed unusual, yet Claire looked genuinely afraid. Then tell me one thing, Emily whispered. Why did my mother give you this? Claire stared at the photograph. Her voice became barely audible. Because she knew you would come looking for answers someday. Emily felt a chill move through her. What answers? Claire looked directly into her eyes. The truth about the night she disappeared. The words landed harder than Emily expected. Her mother had not simply died, at least not according to Claire. She had disappeared. That single distinction reopened a door Emily had spent 6 years trying to keep closed. Ethan noticed the waitress glance toward the window again. He noticed Emily instinctively holding the photograph closer. He noticed the way Claire lowered her voice whenever the diner door opened. None of it made sense, but he understood one thing clearly. This was not about money. It was about trust. Lily reached across the table and gently touched his sleeve. Dad, are we leaving? Ethan looked at his daughter, then at Emily. In a minute. Claire finally placed the photograph back into Emily's hand. Your mother gave this to me the night before everything changed. Emily stared at the picture. What did she tell you? Claire hesitated. Then she whispered the sentence that made Emily forget how to breathe. She told me that one day, her daughter would walk through that door. Claire's last words seemed to echo inside Emily's mind. She told me that one day, her daughter would walk through that door. Emily stared at the waitress, trying to understand how her mother could have predicted this exact moment 6 years ago. What door? She whispered. Claire looked toward the diner entrance. This one. Emily glanced at the glass door behind her. Rain traced thin lines down the window, and the neon sign outside painted red reflections across the wet sidewalk. Why would my mother know I would come here? Claire shook her head. She did not know where you would be. She only knew that if you ever remembered enough, you would find me. Emily lowered her voice. Remembered enough? Claire nodded. There are things you were told not to remember. At the nearby booth, Ethan heard the sentence and looked up. He did not want to interfere, but he could see Emily's hands trembling. Lily was still drawing stars on the napkin. Dad, she whispered, should we help her? Ethan looked at his daughter. We do not know what she needs. Lily thought for a moment. Maybe she needs someone to listen. Ethan gave a faint smile. Maybe. Emily heard him and turned. For a moment, their eyes met. She did not know him, but there was something reassuring about the calm expression on his face. He was not staring at her like a curious stranger. He was simply paying attention. Claire reached beneath the counter and brought out a small envelope. Your mother left this with me. Emily stared at it. Why did you wait 6 years? Claire's eyes lowered. Because she made me promise. Promise what? That I would give it to you only if you came here by yourself. Emily looked confused. Then why are you giving it to me now? Claire glanced toward Ethan and Lily. Because you did not come here alone. Emily turned toward them. I do not understand. Claire leaned closer. Neither do I. She placed the envelope in Emily's hand. It was old, but carefully preserved. Her mother's handwriting was unmistakable. Emily traced one finger over her name. This is hers. Yes. Emily opened it slowly. Inside was a short note. My dear Emily, if you are reading this, then the picture found you before the people who wanted it hidden did. Emily stopped breathing for a moment. She read the sentence again. People who wanted it hidden? Claire nodded. Your mother believed someone was watching her. Who? She never told me. Emily looked at the note again. What happened the night she gave you the photograph? Claire took a slow breath. She came into the diner after midnight. She was alone. She looked exhausted, but she was calm. What did she say? Claire remembered the moment. She told me that she had made a mistake trusting someone in her family. Emily's eyes narrowed. Who? Claire shook her head. She never said. Emily folded the note carefully. Then what am I supposed to do with this? Claire reached beneath the counter again and placed a small brass key beside the envelope. Your mother left this too. Emily picked it up. A tiny number was engraved on the metal. 17. Ethan noticed the key from across the room. He did not know what it meant, but he noticed Claire immediately looked toward the diner window. Her expression changed. Emily followed her gaze. A dark sedan was parked across the street, its windows reflecting the rain. Do you know that car? Emily asked. Claire quietly shook her head. No. Ethan looked outside, then back at Lily. Finish your drawing, sweetheart. Lily nodded. Ethan stood and walked toward the counter, keeping his voice low. I am not trying to get involved, but you should probably take this conversation somewhere private. Emily looked at him. Why? Ethan pointed gently toward the key in her hand. Because whatever that opens seems important. Claire looked at Ethan with surprise. Emily looked at the key. Then she looked at Ethan again. Why are you helping me? Ethan paused. Because I have a daughter. He glanced at Lily. And I know what it means when someone looks like they need one person to stay calm. Emily said nothing. For the first time that evening, she felt less alone. Claire quietly whispered, there is a community center 3 miles from here. Emily looked at the brass key. Number 17? Claire nodded. Your mother rented that locker under another name. Your mother rented that locker under another name. Emily stared at the brass key in her palm. What name? Claire shook her head. I never knew. Your mother only told me where to find it if you ever came back. Ethan looked toward the diner windows once more. The dark sedan was still across the street, its headlights off beneath the steady rain. Then we should not stay here much longer, he said quietly. Claire nodded. Emily slipped the key and let her into her purse. How far is the community center? 3 miles, Claire answered. About 10 minutes by car. Ethan looked at Lily, who was still sitting at the booth with her drawing. I can drive. Emily hesitated. You do not have to. Ethan gave her a calm look. I know. There was no pressure in his voice. No expectation. Just a simple offer. Emily looked at Claire, then at the rain outside. 6 years ago, her mother had trusted this woman with a photograph. Tonight, that photograph had brought Emily back to a secret she did not understand. She finally nodded. Thank you. Ethan returned to the booth and helped Lily gather her crayons. Ready? Lily smiled. Ready. They stepped outside together. The rain had softened into a mist, and the Boston streets reflected the amber glow of the traffic lights. Ethan held the diner door for Claire, then followed Emily toward his older Ford Explorer. Lily climbed into the back seat and buckled herself in. Emily sat in the passenger seat, holding her purse tightly against her lap. As Ethan started the engine, Claire climbed into the back beside Lily. Your mother used to come to the community center every Thursday, Claire said. She worked with families who needed assistance. She never wanted anyone to know how much she gave. Emily looked through the windshield. That sounds like her. Claire smiled faintly. She believed money was useful only when it helped someone else. Ethan glanced at Emily. She sounds like a good woman. Emily looked down. She was. The words were simple, but her voice carried years of grief. Ethan did not respond. He simply drove. The community center stood on a quiet street surrounded by old maple trees. Its brick walls were darkened by rain, and one porch light remained on above the entrance. Claire led them inside. The lobby was empty except for a receptionist reading a book behind the front desk. When Emily gave her name, the woman looked at Claire, then reached beneath the counter. "Locker 17?" she asked. Emily nodded. The receptionist handed Claire an old brass tag. "Your mother paid for it years ago." They walked down a narrow hallway to a small storage room. Rows of metal lockers lined the walls. Claire stopped at number 17. Emily inserted the key. The lock clicked. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Emily opened the door. Inside was a small wooden box wrapped in faded blue cloth. There was also another photograph, a folded letter, and an old cassette tape. Emily lifted the photograph first. It showed her mother standing outside Harrington Manor. Beside her stood Claire, much younger, smiling at the camera. But someone else was in the background. Emily stared at the unfamiliar man. "Who is that?" Claire leaned closer. Her expression changed instantly. "I do not know." Ethan looked at the photograph. "Look at the date." Emily turned it over. The date was 6 years before her mother supposedly died. Beneath it, Laura had written one sentence. "If Emily ever sees this, tell her that the man in the background knows why I disappeared." Emily looked at Ethan. He looked back at her, calm but serious. Then the cassette tape slipped from the box and landed softly on the floor. A handwritten label covered it. Emily picked it up and read the words aloud. "For my daughter, when she is finally ready. Do not play that tape here." Claire's voice was barely above a whisper, but the urgency in it made Emily stop. She held the cassette between both hands and looked at her. "Why?" Claire glanced toward the hallway. "Because your mother did not leave that recording for everyone to hear." Ethan stepped closer to the table. "Then where should we listen?" Claire looked at the receptionist. The woman had already returned to her desk, unaware of what was inside the locker. "There is an old meeting room upstairs," Claire said. "Nobody uses it after 6. Ethan nodded. "Then let us go." They carried the wooden box upstairs. Lily stayed close to Ethan, holding his hand as they walked beneath the soft yellow lights. Emily kept looking at the photograph. The unknown man stood several feet behind her mother, his face partly turned away from the camera. There was something familiar about him, but she could not place it. Inside the meeting room, Ethan closed the door. Claire placed the cassette on an old player sitting on a shelf. Emily stared at it for several seconds before finally nodding. Claire pressed play. Static filled the room. Then came a soft piano melody. Emily immediately recognized it. "That was my mother's song," she whispered. A few seconds later, Laura Harrington's voice came through the speaker. "Emily, if you are hearing this, then you are old enough to know what I could not tell you before." Emily closed her eyes. Her mother sounded exactly as she remembered. Warm, calm, familiar. "I need you to understand something," Laura continued. "What happened to our family was never about money. It was about trust." Emily opened her eyes. Ethan watched her quietly. "There are people around us who believe loyalty means silence. They will tell you that keeping secrets protects the family. Sometimes it does the opposite." Claire looked down. The recording continued. "Your father is not the enemy, Emily. But there is someone close to him who has been moving money through accounts that do not belong to our family." Emily looked at Richard's name on the photograph. "Thomas," she whispered. Claire said nothing. Laura continued. "I found records that prove someone has been using the Harrington name without permission. I copied everything and placed the original documents somewhere only one person knows." The tape clicked softly. Then came a pause. "That person is Claire." Claire lowered her eyes. Emily turned toward her. "You knew about the documents?" Claire nodded. "I knew there were documents. I never knew where your mother put them." Emily looked at the photograph again. "What about the man?" Laura's voice returned. "If you see the man standing behind me in the photograph, do not assume he is my enemy. He was trying to help me." Emily felt a strange wave of confusion. "Then who is he?" Laura did not say his name. Instead, she gave another clue. "He worked for your father, but he was never part of the family business." The recording paused again. Ethan looked at Emily. "That narrows it down." Emily gave a faint smile despite everything. "Not enough." Then Laura's voice became softer. "Emily, there is one more thing. If you ever meet a man who helps you without asking who you are, listen to him. He may remind you that goodness still exists when everything else feels uncertain." Emily slowly turned toward Ethan. He looked genuinely confused. "Why are you looking at me?" he asked. Before Emily could answer, the cassette clicked and stopped. Claire stared at Ethan. "Your name is Ethan Carter, right?" He nodded. Claire's expression changed. Your father worked for Harrington Financial. Ethan frowned. My father died when I was 12. He was an accountant. Claire looked at the old photograph again. Then she whispered, that is the man standing behind your mother. My father. Ethan stared at Claire as though the words belonged to someone else. You are saying my father knew Emily's mother? Claire nodded slowly. He knew more than that. Laura trusted him. Emily looked between them. Then why did nobody ever tell me? Claire lowered her eyes. Because after your mother disappeared, your father was blamed for something he did not do. Ethan took a slow breath. His father had died when Ethan was 12, and for most of his life, he had known almost nothing about the years before his death. His name was Daniel Carter, he said quietly. He worked for Harrington Financial. Claire looked at the photograph again. Daniel was one of the few people Laura believed she could trust. Emily sat down, still holding the old picture. What did he know? Claire walked to the table and opened the wooden box again. Beneath the cassette was a folded sheet of paper. Your mother left this too. Ethan watched as Claire unfolded it. There were several handwritten numbers, account names, and dates. Emily recognized the Harrington Company logo at the top. Those are financial records, she whispered. Claire nodded. Your mother believed someone had been moving money through accounts connected to the company. Ethan studied the page. These dates, he pointed to one line. This was 2 weeks before my father died. Emily looked at him. Do you remember anything about that time? Ethan shook his head. Not much. I was 12. I remember my father coming home late one night. He looked worried, but he told me everything would be fine. His voice softened. The next morning, he was gone. Lily quietly moved closer to her father. Ethan reached for her hand. I am sorry, Emily said. You do not have to be, Ethan replied. I barely remembered it until tonight. Claire looked toward the window. The rain had stopped, leaving the glass covered with tiny drops that reflected the hallway lights. There is something else, she said. Emily looked up. What? Claire pointed to the bottom of the page. Your mother wrote a name there. Emily leaned forward. Beneath the numbers was a single word. Thomas. The room became completely still. Thomas Harrington? Emily asked. Claire nodded. Your uncle. Emily stared at the name. My father always said Uncle Thomas helped keep the company stable after my mother died. Claire said nothing. Ethan looked at the records again. Maybe he did. Emily turned toward him. You do not believe he is responsible? Ethan shook his head. I believe we do not have enough information yet. Claire looked surprised. Most people would already have chosen someone to blame. Ethan gave a quiet answer. Blame is easy. Truth takes longer. Emily looked at him for several seconds. There was no arrogance in his voice. No desire to be right. Just patience. It reminded her of the kind of person her mother had described in the recording. Someone who helped without asking who she was. Claire placed another envelope on the table. Your mother wanted you to have this only after you found Daniel's connection. Emily opened it carefully. Inside was a letter addressed to Ethan's father. Ethan read the first line and went completely still. Dear Daniel, if anything happens to me, protect Emily from the people closest to her. Do not trust the accounts. Do not trust the family story. And most importantly, do not let them convince her that she was abandoned. Ethan looked at Emily. She was already crying quietly. He handed her the letter. Your mother did not abandon you, he said. Emily pressed the letter against her heart. For 6 years, she had carried the belief that her mother's final days had been simple and tragic. Now she understood that there had been something else beneath the silence. Claire suddenly noticed one final detail at the bottom of the letter. A date. The same date as the photograph. Emily, she whispered. Your mother wrote this the night before she disappeared. Emily looked up. Then Ethan noticed a second sentence written beneath the signature. If my daughter ever finds this, tell her the truth. Began with the man who stood behind me. Your mother did not disappear because she wanted to leave you. Emily stared at the sentence beneath the signature, unable to move. The room seemed smaller now, filled with the quiet hum of the old building and the soft sound of rain beginning again outside. Claire stood beside the table, her hands folded tightly in front of her. Ethan remained silent, but his expression had changed. He was no longer simply helping Emily uncover a family secret. His own father was part of the story. Why would my mother mention your father? Emily asked. Ethan looked down at the letter. I do not know, but you said your father was an accountant. He was. Did he ever talk about the Harrington family? Ethan shook his head. Not when I was young. He paused. There was one thing, though. Emily waited. Ethan remembered a small wooden desk in his childhood home, a desk his father had kept locked. After my father died, my grandmother gave me the key. She told me it was better not to ask questions. Claire looked at him carefully. Do you still have it? Ethan nodded. I think so. Emily looked surprised. Where? At my house. Claire took a slow breath. Then that may be the next place we need to look. Ethan glanced at Lily. She was sitting quietly near the window, watching the rain. It is late, he said. We should go home first. Emily looked at the letter. I cannot go home and pretend everything is normal. Ethan understood that feeling. He had spent years learning how to live with unanswered questions about his father. He knew that some truths waited patiently until a person was finally ready to hear them. You do not have to pretend, he said. But you also do not have to solve everything tonight. Emily looked at him. Why are you so calm? Ethan smiled faintly. Because panic has never helped me raise my daughter. Lily looked over and smiled. He says that all the time. For the first time that evening, Emily laughed softly. The sound surprised even her. Claire looked relieved. Your mother would have liked that. The words made Emily quiet again. They returned to Ethan's Ford Explorer and drove through the wet Boston streets. The city lights reflected across the windshield as Ethan followed the familiar roads toward his neighborhood. Lily eventually fell asleep in the back seat. Emily sat beside Ethan, holding Laura's letter carefully. You really do not know who your father was working for? She asked. No, but I remember something from the week before he died. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. He told me that numbers could lie when people wanted them to. Emily looked at him. That sounds important. It did not mean anything to me then. And now? Ethan looked at the ring. Now I think he was trying to tell me something. They reached his small two-story house just before midnight. Ethan unlocked the front door and carried Lily inside. Emily followed quietly. The house was modest but warm, filled with family photographs and small reminders of a life built carefully over time. Ethan walked to a cabinet in the hallway and opened the bottom drawer. He moved aside old birthday cards, school papers, and a faded photograph of his father. Then he found a small wooden box. This is it. Emily stepped closer. Ethan opened the box. Inside was an old brass key, several receipts, and a folded piece of paper. Claire had followed them inside and suddenly stopped. That key, she whispered. Ethan looked at her. What about it? Claire pointed toward the number engraved on the metal. 17. Emily felt her heart sink. The same number as the locker. Ethan looked at the key again. Then he unfolded the paper. His father's handwriting appeared across the page. There were only 7 words. If Laura trusted you, trust the daughter. Ethan looked at Emily. She looked back at him. Neither spoke. Somewhere outside, a clock struck midnight. And for the first time, Emily understood that her mother had not left behind a mystery by accident. She had built a path. And somehow, Ethan Carter had been standing on that path all along. That key belonged to my father, Ethan said quietly. Emily looked at the brass key on the table, then at the one Claire had given her earlier. They were almost identical, except for a tiny mark near the edge. Why would he have another key to the same locker? She asked. Ethan shook his head. Maybe he did not. Claire stepped closer and studied both keys. There is a difference. Ethan turned his father's key under the lamp. A small number was engraved beneath the 17. 24, he said. Emily looked at Claire. What does that mean? Claire slowly shook her head. I do not know. Lily stirred on the couch, still half asleep, and Ethan lowered his voice. We should check the locker again in the morning. Emily nodded, but she did not look satisfied. She opened the folded paper once more. If Laura trusted you, trust the daughter. Why would your father write this? She asked. Ethan stared at the handwriting. Maybe he knew my father had something your mother needed. Claire looked toward the photograph on the table. Or maybe your father was helping Laura protect you. Emily took a slow breath. Then why did he die without telling anyone? The question hung in the room. Ethan did not have an answer. He had spent 26 years believing his father's story ended with a simple tragedy. Now every memory seemed to have another meaning. He walked to an old bookshelf and pulled down a photo album. My grandmother kept these, he said. Maybe there is something here. They searched through pictures from Ethan's childhood, school ceremonies, family birthdays, summer trips. Then Emily stopped. Wait. She pointed to a photograph from Ethan's 12th birthday. His father stood behind him, smiling beside a woman Emily recognized immediately. Laura Harrington. Emily's breath caught. She was there. Ethan looked closer. I have never seen this before. Claire moved beside them. Look at her hand. Laura was holding a small envelope. On the envelope was the same symbol engraved on Ethan's father's key. A circle surrounding the number 24. Emily stared at it. That cannot be a coincidence. Ethan turned another page. Behind the photograph was a handwritten note. The ink had faded, but the words were still readable. Daniel, if anything happens, the second key opens what the first one cannot. Keep it away from Thomas. Claire covered her mouth. Emily whispered, Thomas again. Ethan closed the album. We need to find out what number 24 opens. Claire looked at the clock. There was another storage area in the old community center. 24 was not a locker number. It was a room number. Emily stood. Then we go there tomorrow. Ethan shook his head gently. Not tomorrow. Emily looked at him. Why? Because if your mother planned this carefully, there may be a reason the second key stayed hidden for so long. He paused. We should understand the message before we act. Emily nodded slowly. She was beginning to understand why Laura had trusted Daniel, and perhaps why she had trusted someone like Ethan. He did not rush toward answers simply because they were painful. He waited until the truth could be faced clearly. Claire looked at the photograph again. There is one more thing you should know. Emily turned. What? Claire pointed to the corner of the picture. A woman stood several feet behind Laura and Daniel, partially hidden beside a doorway. That woman was Margaret Cole, Claire said. She was your mother's personal assistant. Emily studied the unfamiliar face. Where is she now? Claire hesitated. No one knows. Ethan looked at the photograph. Then maybe she knows what happened. Emily picked up the picture and held it carefully. And maybe she knows why my mother expected me to come back. Outside, the first light of morning began to soften the darkness over Boston. Nobody in the room noticed the passing hours. They were too focused on the photograph, the two keys, and the name that kept appearing wherever the truth was hidden. Thomas. But there was another name waiting in the shadows of the story. Margaret Cole. And she might be the only person still alive who knew what Laura had been trying to protect. Margaret Cole is the only person who can tell us what your mother was trying to protect. Claire's words settled over the room as Emily stared at the old photograph. Morning light had begun to fill the windows, turning the rain outside into a silver haze. Ethan stood beside the table, studying the woman in the background. Do you remember anything about her? He asked. Claire nodded slowly. Margaret worked for your mother for almost 8 years. She knew every appointment, every letter, every person Laura trusted. Emily looked at the photograph again. Then why would she disappear? Claire hesitated. Because after Laura was gone, Margaret left the city. Where did she go? I do not know. Ethan picked up the album and turned it toward the light. There may be a clue. Beneath the photograph, barely visible in the faded ink, was a street name. Emily leaned closer. That is not Boston. Claire shook her head. No, it is in Providence, Rhode Island. Ethan looked at the clock. That is about an hour away. Emily immediately reached for her coat. Then we go. Ethan gave her a careful look. We should first find out whether Margaret still lives there. Claire took out her phone and searched through an old list of contacts. After several minutes, she stopped. I found a number. Emily leaned closer. Call it. Claire hesitated. What if she does not want to talk? Emily answered softly. Then at least she will know I am still looking. Claire called. The line rang several times before a woman answered. Hello. Claire froze. Margaret. Silence followed. Then the woman whispered. Who gave you this number? Claire looked at Emily. Laura's daughter. The line went completely quiet. Emily could hear her own heartbeat. Then Margaret said, Where is she? Claire handed the phone to Emily. I am here. Margaret's voice changed. Emily. Yes. Another silence. You sound just like your mother. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. I need to know what happened. Margaret sighed. You are asking questions your mother hoped you would never have to ask. Why? Because the truth was never supposed to become your burden. Emily looked at Ethan. He gave her a quiet nod. It already is, she said. Margaret breathed slowly. Then you need to come to Providence. Emily asked, Will you tell me everything? Margaret paused. I will tell you what I know. Ethan looked at Emily. We should go together. Emily nodded. Lily, now fully awake, appeared in the doorway holding her school backpack. Are we going somewhere? Ethan smiled gently. Yes, sweetheart. We have a little trip. Lily looked at Emily and then at Claire. Is it about the mystery? Emily smiled despite herself. Yes. Lily nodded seriously. Then I think we should solve it. Ethan laughed softly. The tension in the room eased for a moment. They left Boston just after 8 in the morning. The drive south was quiet at first. Emily watched the landscape pass through the window, holding Laura's photograph in her lap. Ethan kept both hands on the steering wheel, focused on the road. There is something I do not understand, Emily said. What? If my mother trusted your father, why did she never tell my family about him? Ethan thought for a moment. Maybe she did. Emily looked at him. What do you mean? Maybe someone made sure the information disappeared. Claire, sitting in the back, quietly agreed. That is what Laura feared. They reached Providence shortly before 10. Margaret's address led them to a modest brick apartment building on a quiet street lined with trees. Ethan parked nearby. Emily looked up at the building. Are you ready? Ethan asked. She nodded. They walked to the entrance and rang the bell. Nothing happened. Ethan rang again. Then the door opened slowly. An older woman with silver hair stood behind it. Her eyes immediately went to the photograph in Emily's hand. Margaret Cole whispered, Laura told me that if you ever came here, I had to give you something. Emily stepped closer. What? Margaret looked past her toward Ethan. Her expression suddenly changed. You brought Daniel Carter's son. Ethan froze. Margaret reached for the doorframe. Then the time has finally come. Margaret Cole stepped aside, and Emily entered the quiet apartment with Ethan, Claire, and Lily behind her. The room smelled faintly of old books and coffee. Photographs covered one wall, but Emily stopped when she saw the largest one. It showed her mother standing beside Daniel Carter, both of them smiling outside Harrington Manor. Why did you keep this? Emily asked. Margaret looked at Ethan. Because your father kept his promise. Ethan swallowed. What promise? Margaret walked to a small cabinet and removed a sealed envelope. Laura knew someone was moving money through accounts. Connected to the family. Daniel found the records. He was supposed to give them to your father, but before he could, Laura realized something worse. Emily stepped closer. What? Margaret looked directly at her. The money was only a distraction. Someone wanted control of the Harrington Company, but Laura discovered they were also hiding something about your identity. Emily stared at her. My identity? Margaret nodded. You were never abandoned. You were protected. Claire lowered her eyes. Ethan looked confused. Protected from whom? Margaret handed the envelope to Emily. From people who believed your family fortune belonged to them. Emily opened it carefully. Inside was a letter written by Laura. My dear Emily, if you are reading this, then you have found the people I trusted most. I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. I left because staying would have placed you in the middle of a family secret you were too young to understand. I asked Daniel to protect the truth. I asked Claire to protect the photograph. And I asked Margaret to protect the final piece. Emily looked up with tears in her eyes. What is the final piece? Margaret pointed toward a small wooden box on the shelf. That. Ethan stepped closer. Margaret opened it and removed a memory card inside a clear protective case. Your mother recorded this after she discovered everything. Emily stared at it. Why did she never send it to me? Margaret answered softly. Because she wanted you to hear it only when you were strong enough to understand that forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. Ethan looked at Emily. You do not have to watch it today. Emily nodded. I know. She took a breath. But I am ready. Margaret connected the memory card to an old laptop. The screen flickered, and Laura appeared. Emily immediately recognized her mother's smile. Emily, Laura said, if you are seeing this, then you have found the truth. Emily covered her mouth. Laura continued, I want you to know that your father was never your enemy. He was trying to protect you, just as Daniel was. The person who betrayed our trust was someone inside the family, but I do not want you to spend your life carrying anger for them. Emily looked at Claire, then Ethan. Laura's voice softened. If Ethan Carter is with you, then you are safe with someone who understands what family truly means. His father was a good man. Ethan became one too. Ethan looked stunned. Emily turned toward him, tears running quietly down her cheeks. Laura continued, do not measure people by their wealth, their titles, or the doors they can open. Measure them by what they do when nobody is watching. The recording ended. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Emily looked at Ethan. My mother knew you would be here. Ethan shook his head slowly. I do not think she knew me. Emily smiled through her tears. Maybe she knew the kind of man you would become. Months later, the truth about the hidden accounts was finally brought into the open, and the family began rebuilding what years of silence had damaged. Claire no longer carried Laura's secret alone. Margaret finally returned the last photograph to Emily. Ethan continued raising Lily in the same quiet way he always had, never asking for recognition. One evening, Emily placed her mother's photograph on the diner counter beside Claire. Ethan and Lily sat nearby, sharing a slice of apple pie. Richard stood at the doorway, watching his daughter smile. Nobody needed a speech. Nobody needed applause. Emily simply looked at Ethan and said, "Thank you for staying." Ethan smiled. You were never supposed to face it alone. Outside, the Boston evening settled into golden light. The photograph remained between them, no longer a symbol of loss, but a reminder that love can survive silence, truth can survive time, and sometimes the greatest second chance begins with one quiet act of trust.